Following a series of scandals in recent years, new research has shown more than half of the public do not trust police to solve crimes. The findings from YouGov also revealed more than a third of those surveyed said they have no faith in the police to maintain law and order, while over a third think it's unlikely that the perpetrator would be arrested and prosecuted if they reported a sexual assault. The devastating lack of confidence also follows the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving Metropolitan Police officer Wayne Cousins and the jailing of the serial rapist David Carrick, who was a member of the firearms unit. Joining me in the studio now, former Met Police Detective Peter Bleskley. Thank you, Peter. And down the line, I'm joined by forensic psychologist Dr. Ruth Tully. Good to see you, Ruth. Thank you very much indeed. Let me start with Peter on this. I mean, you've been a lifelong police officer. It must be an actual kind of painful feeling in the heart that public confidence in the police has dwindled so catastrophically.
Well, it would be if modern policing represented anything close to what it was that I worked in all those years ago. This survey today was part of the Times' launch of their Justice and Crime Commission, which is going to be a year-long study of the entire criminal justice system. And it'll be very interesting to see what their findings and recommendations are. But yes, these are catastrophic numbers for the police, but they only have themselves to blame. Senior officers will say, well, it's the age of austerity that cut so many job numbers and all of that. That's getting on for 15 years old, that argument. It's wearing a bit thin. Essentially, the dramatic drop in trust and respect for the police has come because modern policing has turned its back on the moderate mainstream of Britain. They do not investigate our burglaries, our car crimes, our phone thefts, our bicycle thefts, fraud, and of course they've abandoned the shopkeepers of this once great nation. And that is why, because those crimes were how people connected with the police and they don't ever anymore, that's played a large part in respect tanking.
So explain what the police are focusing on instead. You've given the long list of things that they're not focusing on. We also know that sexual assault is another one that, you know, if women are quite certain that if they're sexually assaulted, they can't trust that the police investigation into that will yield any sort of, perpetrator, but B, treat them fairly. They can't really trust the process at all. So what are police focusing on that is, in your view, the wrong thing?
In terms of uniform response police officers, they are now a social breakdown organisation. When your car breaks down, you call the AA or the RAC or another breakdown service. When society breaks down, 999 gets dialed and the police turn up. So they're kind of like social workers in uniform to a large degree, although they do, of course, deal with disorder. And because they're going from call to call to call to call, they claim that they do not have the resources and are therefore not able to deal with all the crimes that I mentioned previously.
So what are the sorts of calls they're getting? When you say social disorder, when, so society breaks down, you call the police and it's a kind of ad hoc response to this call, this call, this call. But what are the calls about? What sort of thing is happening?
Well, what they will respond to immediately is where there is a threat or a risk of harm to people.
Right.
So violence, disorder, disputes, whether they be domestic, neighbourly, on the high street, outside a pub, in what any kind of guise that comes from, because they claim their primary job is to deal with threats and risks where people are at harm. And that, of course, stands firm. But there has been such chronic mismanagement of police resources over recent years, with hundreds suspended, hundreds not able to do public-facing jobs, and hundreds doing desk jobs, which could otherwise be hived off to other people to do, and many lazy police officers not wanting to do the rough and tumble of frontline policing, that this is why the numbers are so dramatic. They can't retain staff, they can't recruit staff in the numbers that they need to, and policing is in absolute crisis, but there's a shocking lack of honesty from senior police about it all.
And let me bring Dr. Ruth Tully in on this, because if we don't have faith in the police, the whole thing crumbles. We have to believe in justice and we have to believe in the police and their ability and their acumen in upholding and maintaining justice and our safety, don't we? We have to believe that the police have our best wishes at heart and they're trying to look after us, don't we?
Of course we do. And I think that, unfortunately, public confidence has been dented by some of these high-profile cases that you mentioned earlier, such as Sarah Everard and so on. And ultimately, it's going to take a long time, and people experiencing more positive things and more positive outcomes in different cases for the public to rebuild that confidence as well. I mean, I don't have the experience that your other guest has in direct policing, but I've worked alongside the police in some really complex cases, and I've been heartened by the efforts that have gone into those cases to achieve justice. And they're the kind of cases that the public don't get to see the outcomes of necessarily, and that people might be less aware of. So I think it's about the public persona, what we get to hear about as well. And there's a lot of work that does go unnoticed too, as well as mistakes having been made, of course.
Peter, it sounds, the way you speak about it, as if we're heading for kind of lawlessness, anarchy and absolute chaos if something really dramatic isn't done to kind of restructure and recalibrate and refocus the police in the right direction with the right kind of leadership, you know, top down. So are we anywhere near getting that, or is it all going to go to rack and ruin?
We have lawlessness in many, many parts of this once great nation. And I see no green shoots of recovery, because all the current cohort of senior police officers are cut from the same cloth. And so are the other greasy pole climbers who are mimicking exactly what their seniors say in order to get up into that position when one of them step-asides or otherwise retires. It's a continual kind of sausage mincing machine of the same bland, woke, fluffy kind of senior police leadership, which will not reconnect with policing of the past because they regard it all as being so terrible, where in fact, of course, a lot of it worked and worked well.
Yeah.
But it's been sacrificed on the altar of political correctness 20 years ago, on the wokery now, and consequently we have some good aspects of policing that Ruth alludes to, but that's if you get murdered.
Yeah.
That's when you'll have a well-resourced team of experienced detectives. That's no good to us because you won't be there to see the investigation.
I mean, talking of leadership, we have Sir Mark Rowley, the head of the Met, under attack by many different factions and political persuasions, partly because of the incident that took place over the weekend where Gideon Falter, the chairman of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, was walking through London. His walk coincided, as walks would if you were walking through London every other weekend since October the 7th, the massacre in Israel. And the altercation between him and the police officer who threatened to arrest him for being clearly definable and recognisable as a Jew walking through London.
There have been a number of utterly unacceptable situations around these protests in recent weeks and months. Any opposition to these protests has sometimes led to arrest, banners being unlawfully taken from people, and threats of arrest being issued to those who merely want to observe, express an opposing view, or otherwise see what's going on. Basically, opposition to these protests is being quashed, often unlawfully. They have acquiesced, they have appeased. Mark Rowley's Met Police have appeased the violent, hateful sections of those protests who are nothing other than a lawless mob who make illegal chants, carry illegal posters and other depictions, and call for the genocidal destruction of a sovereign state. Because Rowley has appeased in such a pathetic, weak manner, they have become empowered. Now is the time for Mark Rowley to grow a spine and say, we can't guarantee that these are safe. We think there's going to be serious disruption, and consequently apply to the Home Secretary to have these marches banned.
Thank you very much indeed, both of you.